Available for your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Ultra 64. Killer Instinct.
With music ranging from 90s dance tracks to rock, and sound effects that could pierce even the densest of arcade floors, the sounds of Killer Instinct are as iconic as its aesthetic or any of its characters. And when the series returned in 2013, the emphasis on audio evolved even further to help tell the narrative of each and every battle. How did KI sound come together, and what are the difficulties in making an interactive audio system? To answer those questions, we talked to a variety of sound designers, composers, and artists involved with the series over its history. And we start with the ones who put it all together in the first place.
I suppose going way back, I started playing trumpet at the age of 7. And when I hit grade 8, I said to my folks, I want to sort of get into improvisation and that sort of stuff. So I went to see a teacher down at Leeds College of Music. He said, you need to get some chord knowledge. So I got a keyboard. And then immediately the guys at school who are in a band said, you should come and join our band. So I kind of switched immediately, went and joined a rock band. Did that for quite a few years and sort of pursued it sort of fairly seriously. I started being an assistant for a composer in Leeds and writing music for TV and library albums, which are kind of albums that you make and then people use the music and then you get paid royalties on it. Around that time, I was kind of trying to just build a showreel together. It was my brother actually gave me a copy of Edge magazine and said, there's this company here in some place called Twycross looking for musicians. Why don't you send a tape in? So I did. I got an interview and started working in April 5th, 1994, on the same day as Graham.
My route into games was I was a massive game player as a kid. I wanted to get into computer games in one way or another. I didn't really know how that was going to be, but my other interest was music. I spent about 4.5 to 5 years self-teaching myself composition whilst doing sort of 9 to 5 jobs that were driving me crazy. So any spare hours I had, I would be writing music either at a piano or later on it was directly onto an Amiga 500. I was sending tapes off to a few companies that were advertising for musicians. There was a few of those, and then there's the rare one. I didn't really think much about it. At the time, I didn't even realize that they were originally Ultimate Play the Game, which were sort of the 8-bit all-stars, if you like, of the day. They liked what I sent in, got the interview, and like Robin said, we both started on the same day.
You were split into teams, and there was the KI team and there was a Donkey Kong team, and we had like a key that would get us to our audio music block. But initially, we weren't even able to go and see the team. Tim and Chris were just super secret about everything, just keep everything, you only need what you need to know kind of thing. I remember the first lot of sound effects we recorded was just sort of like reacts. I remember recording in my office, but we were in a room not dissimilar to this, probably a higher ceiling, and it came. We tried to get as close as we could on the microphone, but it still came back quite echoey. So very, very quickly at the end of my office, we built a vocal booth out of washing line and blankets.
It's funny looking back to it. It was, we were quite naive. We weren't really, obviously, like we said, it was our first game. We were just learning as we went along because we were both musicians, really, first and foremost. So. Yes. To be brought onto a game and suddenly you're directing people and trying to get the best out of them and making sound effects for a game that you hardly ever saw. That was the other thing compared to now where you're more or less playing the game daily, and so much of it was done blind, wasn't it, Robin?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kev Bayliss was quite a big help, wasn't he? Because he used to come in usually on all the VO sessions and he'd sort of coach whoever was doing the sound effects. We were fortunate that the team were really quite experienced and they kind of helped us along.
Oh, Flash! Oh!
Killer! Killer! Yeah!
One of the first tunes I wrote for KI, the team were putting together a video just to sort of give an update to Nintendo. So I wrote a tune for that. That music ended up on a DK video at E3. And then Tim came back from E3, he said, we've got to get that tune into Donkey Kong, which turned into Funky's Flight's music. That was originally a tune that was in KI. we had various members on the team. So some liked rock and metal. So there's a little bit of that in there. But then we had people who were just like really into the sort of 90s music like that. I was trying to think of the groups that were around at the time, like Two Unlimited. So it was just kind of influenced by what people were listening to on the team as well, I suppose.
We weren't really looking at other games to see what they were doing either. I mean, we were young and naive, and we were trying to please the team, I think.
Yeah, I suppose. The first piece of music I wrote was Sabrewolves. And as you hear it on the KI Cut CD, it had that big long intro. Imagine like outside the castle, inside the castle, and I wrote this massive piece of music, and then we were like, well, this is never going to fit into memory.
I was writing quite long intros as well for the first Chief Thunder tunes because we hadn't seen the game. So we were just going on, write a tune for Sabrewolf, write a tune for Chief Thunder. And until we actually saw the game and thought, well, yeah, the action is immediate and the rounds are over very quickly, we changed our writing style to make more sense of the game.
To me, it seemed like it was always about experimentation, and it was about, okay, well, games have never had a score like this before. Games haven't had like this visceral sort of announcer that is just like ripping your head off, you know, with and reinforcing everything that you're doing.
We only ever worked with people within Rare, and Tim was basically said, we should use Chris Sutherland, he's got a great voice.
We tried a couple of people out for the announcer, but then, he just came in and that's what came out of his mouth. And we were like, wow.
We had a few revisions of that list of the combos, I think. And Kev coached him in the booth and just said, okay, this is the Ultra, this is, so just really go for it. And it took a few goes, but then he did one that was kind of almost shot his throat, I think.
He's a very unassuming guy, and as a lot of programmers are, they're very quiet. To hear him do all this stuff was incredible, wasn't it? It was an SE70, I think, which we used for the vocoder, but the DP4, it had a pitch shifter on it, didn't it?
That's right, it was the DP4, yeah, that's right.
So I think you added that to his voice to sort of give it some beef at the lower end.
Riptor, winner, killer combo, Ultra Combo!
And I remember Mark Bettridge, who was like the lead software on it, saying, I want people to come off this machine shaking because I want them to, the sound of it and everything. I want it to be just kind of a overload.
I think it really captured the sound of the 90s, honestly. Great music, especially in the realm of video games and fighting games. There's a driving force in the action and in your experience. And it was amazing.
It's like a flying saucer.
That was kind of my introduction to video game music, and what I understood from that is that the music on Killer Cuts sounded to me as a 7-year-old kid the same as music that you'd hear on the radio or that you'd hear in your older brother's CD collection or whatever he was listening to. It sounded the same thing. So to me, it was like a way that they were kind of borrowing pop culture and music that was popular and putting it into the game to kind of make it relevant. Now, what's important to notice about that though is that not every game was doing that at the time, right? That was pretty pretty forward-thinking stuff. And it's also worth pointing out that Killer Cuts itself has completely sort of different and fresh edits that were like, uniquely mastered for the CD release. They didn't just grab what was on the game and then throw it on the CD. They did like sort of special versions for that, right?
It was part of the marketing budget for the Super Nintendo version. Yeah, I remember Dave Wise coming into our rooms one day and saying they've got however many $1,000 for this, and they want to mix it in a studio, which, was incredible. I mean, to have that on your first game.
It was actually, wasn't it? When you think about it, incredible. I remember Nintendo wanting to mix it in Seattle at Heart Studio, didn't they? And I think we said, we'd rather mix it here if we can do. So we looked around for studios in the UK where we could go mix. And we landed on Air Studios in London, Lyndhurst, because I think they were the only studio in the UK who had a digital desk. Is that right?
Possibly. I don't know why that was why was that?
Because we wanted to keep everything in the digital domain, because we had digital outputs.
Did we?
Yeah, we did. So we wanted to keep everything so it was lossless. We thought, right, well, we'll do that, and then we can just keep. We won't lose any quality. It'll be just digital all the way through. And then the first thing the engineer said, digital sounds a bit cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, before we go bounce the final mix out, I'm going to take it through this old compressor and then take it to tape, and then we'll take. And we were like, oh, okay.
To us, we came from a home recording background where everything's noisy and buzzy, and even Rare, it was a domestic mains, really, wasn't it? It was everything had a buzz on it. So we just thought, we're going to go into the studio. It's going to be buzzy as like it is normally. But there's none of that, obviously, where they were.
No, and actually, he was actually A/Bing between digital and going through the compressor. He told us was used on Sgt. Pepper's. Maybe they said that to everybody. I don't know, but and he was A/Bing between digital and that signal, and he was going, look, listen to that.
He took those songs and he made them sound enormous, didn't he? I mean, Saberwolf was unbelievable what he did to that.
An engineer called Jeff Foster, he's still at Air Studios now. There's 2 studios in the UK, there's Abbey Road and Air that kind of record the orchestras for the movies. Jeff had worked on with Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer and people, and then we came along with our synths and samplers. We'd been through it once and made KI, so had a better idea of the hardware and had a better idea of how to sort of save when writing a tune, how to sort of save and repeat sections and things. Don't have cymbals that have long releases and things like that. That would eat up all your memory. We got a Spirit Studio 16-channel desk, and then hooking that up to the cabinet as well made a massive difference. So I could mix directly onto that speaker with the cabinet and hear how it was resonating, and just try and squeeze as much out of the mix as possible.
Late in '94, they bought us a load of equipment because we brought our own stuff in mostly, didn't we? For the first one, you had that, and we had one sampler between the team. You had that terrible bloody Ensoniq one. You knew how to work the Roland, and I remember you got it.
Yes,
got it, and you were loading sounds up. You said to me, KO2 is going to sound so much better. You were so pleased.
And the great thing about the Roland sampler is you could plug it into a CRT and you had a screen, and it came with a mouse, and it was just a lot easier to edit on instead of this tiny little screen, which was a bit like kind of trying to decorate your Hallstatt and Landing through the letterbox. It was
it's so bad.
It was terrible. Yeah, I mean, KO1, we had an Ensoniq TS12. I think the lead sound on that I used as the main lead sound for the main theme. KI2, we had Roland 760 sampler and their library, which was incredible. Korg Wave Station SR, which had a load of sounds and stuff in it.
You have the 1080 by that point, the JV 1080, or was that later?
Yes, got the 1080 as well, yes. It was like an upgrading gear, but I think we got better. We were sort of settling into how to write music for games. The other sort of secret weapon we had was Grant Kirkhope, who started at Rare and played guitar. So that meant we didn't have to sort of try and cut riffs together from sample CDs. We actually had a guitarist who could plug his amp in and play. With you saying about the Gargos theme, I mean, that's Grant playing the lead. He's playing the rhythm part on the lead, and it's I would have probably struggled to put something together like that.
I just remember that you put so much into that, Robin, because that was a period of Rare's sort of history where the guys would work late into the night, virtually every night, and you were burning the midnight oil there to get those tracks out. It wasn't just the gear that made the second one better. It was, Robin is a fantastic composer. But the gear that we had for the first one, and this is an excuse, was kind of cobbled together with sticky tape, if you like. I mean, I remember Dave bringing in that ASR 10 and saying we could share it between 4 of us. It's like, that's just not how things work. So,
I mean, initially me and Graham shared an office together.
Yeah.
we did, because there was an office next to us, but it's like, no, that's for somebody else. And we were sat there in this office, and so we had to take it in turns to play on the speakers.
I remember.
We were playing on headphones and then go, can I just listen to it over the speakers? I just want to hear how it's sounding. And then so we'd take it in turns. And eventually I think I moved into the office. I just was like, is anybody going to take this office? Because, we could really do to be sort of in our own rooms.
I forgot about that. Yeah, it's crazy.
I suppose it was such a blur, wasn't it? That first game. And I remember the first time we burnt things to ROM, we were just amazed. We had to sort of write the music and do some sound effects, and then we had to put the ROMs down, burn them to a floppy disk, and then take the floppy disk over to Hugh in testing, who would bake some ROMs and then burn the audio to the ROMs. So eventually there was eight 512 megabyte ROMs in that board. And then he would come back with the ROMs for you.
512K.
Sorry, 512K, yeah. And he'd just go, that's it, what? I mean, I was completely blown away at the time, thinking that's what it's all in there. That music's just in there. It was a really exciting time. It was really exciting. It was exciting to finally actually have a job. Well, be able to earn a living from music. And I think that was probably, we just gave it everything we could, because that was, those opportunities don't come along very often. You just
No, certainly not.
You just embrace them and go, right, I'm going to properly rinse this for all it's worth, which I think we did.
After Killer Instinct Gold's release in the late 90s, the series would lie dormant until it was revived by Microsoft and Double Helix in 2013. Knowing how beloved the audio was in the original games, the team that started to form would embrace this endeavor, challenges and all.
I want to say I heard about it probably mid to late 2012. It was shortly after I started, but I was actually in a different division. I was in the HoloLens division. I transferred, essentially. And throughout that, I remember Chris Melroth, who was part of Central Media within Microsoft. He was kind of letting me know of what games were kind of coming down the pipe, and he went, Killer Instinct. I went, what? And he's like, yeah. And Boyd's the audio director on it. He and Jed and Mick kind of helped establish what season 1 was going to be and all that stuff. And then it was like maybe 6 months later, we started talking seriously about me getting over into Central Media. And he was like, which one do you want to be on? Before it was out of his mouth, I'm like, Killer Instinct. And whenever I came on board, I was basically like kind of a consultant. And like I played it a whole bunch and I sent Jed some feedback.
So the fun story is, actually before I moved, I worked on a game for 7 months with Double Helix, working from Vancouver. The game also got canceled, and they told me 3 days before I had my flight flying to California. They told me like, hey, we're sorry, the game is canceled. I know it was, your dream project and everything, but hey, you might actually just want to, come and visit us still, and we have like another game here. If you're interested, we'll show it to you. When I arrived, they were like, hey, nice to meet you. Yeah, so we have this other game. I don't know if you ever played it. It's called Killer Instinct. I was like, what? Killer Instinct? Yeah, I'm a huge fan. And I was like, yeah, so, we don't have anybody to do the audio, so you're going to be in charge of starting the first prototype. It was a vertical slice that the studio was trying to pitch to Microsoft. I was like, okay, let's do it. And then when we started to get like sort of a basis, we're like, hey, what are we going to do with music? Dave Verfai, who was the creative director working very closely with Mike Willett, wanted to have sort of like a playful Asian track. And so we started to look online. I took a video capture of the game. I put music over it. And so we're like testing different things, right? At some point I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. We need to have a composer, someone who really knows that stuff. at some point we're like, you know what, we're gonna just like find a bunch of different composers. We're gonna ask them, you know, if they're interested in the project, see if they can give us a demo. At the same time, I ran into a music video that Mick Gordon made on his spare time. He went to GDC, the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco, and he recorded people. And he was asking people like, hey, can you say something? Like, hey, how's it going? People were laughing. There was lots of noise and everything. But they were making weird sounds. They were like, blah, 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 blah. And so Mick Gordon actually took all those vocal sounds and he turned it into a beautiful track. And he made every single sound made from those little blips and beeps from like people talking. I thought it was the most creative thing that I've ever heard. He made the kick drums, he made the snare, he made like the synthesizers, everything built from voices. It was incredible. I was like, oh, this guy is so creative. I need to get in contact with him.
So it's weird. For years at that time, there were rumors that Killer Instinct was going to come back. And I remember each year, E3 would come around and they'd be hoping for another Killer Instinct announcement. And it just wouldn't happen, right? And that went on for years. Years and years and years and years and years, right? I myself, as being a fan of that series, was looking forward to it myself. Honestly, it got to the point where I just sort of started forgetting about it. And that was the thing. We just sort of said that Killer Instinct was going to be a thing that was resigned to the past. So I'm sitting there one day and I get an email that pops up and it's from Jed. And I'd known of Jed. Jed's a really incredible sound designer. So when I saw his email pop up, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a big deal, whatever it is, right? This email said, hey, Mick, we'd like to talk to you about writing music for a new game that we're working on. We're working with Microsoft. It's going to be a launch title for the new Xbox, and it's a fighting game. And I went, yeah, cool. That sounds cool, man. Like, I've never done a fighting game before, but I've done some kid stuff and I've done some like Need for Speed things. I'd love to put together some demos and stuff like that. And they sent through a brief, and the brief was to write music for a character named Jago. And the moment I read that, like, oh man, I can't even express the sort of high levels of excitement that I kind of felt by just reading that one 4-letter word, Jago, because I myself knew exactly what that meant. These guys were going to be doing the next Killer Instinct. So straight away, like, the excitement hit the roof. And then immediately afterwards, this utter crushing, sinking feeling of dread of like, how the hell am I going to bring Killer Instinct back from then into now? Like, it felt like such a daunting task for me. It stressed me the hell out like crazy because I knew about the community. I knew how passionate they were. Whenever they talked about the game, they always talked about the music at the same time. So the pressure on that thing was absolutely insane. I got to work on Jago's theme, and man, I just crushed, like just poured my heart and soul into it, right? I spent days and nights, just working away at my computer, coming up with all these incredible ideas, and I sent it off to them. And I was like, man, I've got this. This is going to be incredible. And I completely flunked it. I failed the demo shockingly. It was so off key of what they wanted that it was a complete and utter failure.
I think it's like, one of those things where when you have a creative director, some people hire up, and they throw like an inspiration or, they have an idea, but maybe the words that they say are not exactly what they're thinking. I had no experience leading the audio on a project before. And that was a big mistake. And, I learned something to let the composer actually, dive into this creative journey. And so the first track was just a complete miss. And I think it was my fault because I didn't get all the right information from the creative director to actually, explain it properly.
It's pretty bad. This is the first piece of music I wrote for Killer Instinct. This flunked the demo and I almost lost the job based on this. But anyway, I got chatting to them and expressed my like huge amounts of passion for the franchise. And I asked to have some discussions with them and talk about kind of like what they wanted to do. And through chatting to Mike and Jed and those folks there, they sort of started to give me this impression of what they were going to do with Killer Instinct. I sort of grabbed all of their little nuggets of information and inspiration that they were giving me, and then I poured that into another demo, which thankfully happened to be on the mark for Jago.
Mick was awesome, iterated super quickly, and the track he had after was fantastic. So he went from like two opposites, and that's where we knew he was the right composer for the project.
With sound playing such a key role in the series' history, Jed, Mick, and the rest of the KI team had a daunting task at hand. How do you take a series that is so of the 90s and update it for a new audience 20 years later?
So I've been really fortunate to have been in that position a few times, and the process for me is always the same. It's identifying what made that modern at the time, and then what is the modern equivalent of today. So Jago's theme back in the 90s was like a kind of a 90s dance thing, right?
Let's do it now.
That's cool and it sounds really dated now, but at that time that sounded like so cutting edge and modern and interesting, you know. So we just try to find the modern equivalent of what's, you know, cutting edge and modern and whatever. But for Jago specifically and for the game, I remember talking to, I can't remember, I think it was Mike maybe, and Mike said to me that he wants it to feel badass this time, or badass, right, this time around. And the moment he said that word, I was like, oh, I got it. I was so stuck in this idea of it being a kind of campy 90s fighting game, because that's how you look back at it from the modern era. But it's like, no, this needs to feel heavy and kind of, you know, big and punchy and modern. And once he gave me that one word led to all of those decisions on Jago. Killer Instinct had a very, very, very low budget. You know, I say this in the nicest way possible, but I ended up losing money on it. Like we ran out of budget very, very quickly. So we needed a crowd chanting. How do you do a crowd chanting when you've got no money? Well, you ask the developers. And when they're on their Friday lunch break, you get your buddy Jed to feed them a bunch of beer that's from the fridge and set up a bunch of microphones. And you ask them to shout and do all sorts of crowd things in their lunchroom. This is the Double Helix studio in their lunchroom giving us these shouts. I really wanted as much badassery as we could. And to me, one of the most badass sounds out there is Tibetan throat singing. And whenever you're faced with an opportunity like that, it's like, hey man, I can learn something new here. I can learn to throat sing. So I did that. I got some lessons and I practiced really hard and I learned to throat sing. And so that's me doing the vocals of Jago there, just because I wanted this like cool throat singing sound. The original Killer Instinct track for Orchid, I think it's great, but it is very much of the time. And this is, I guess, something that we're trying to grasp at the moment is like, how do we accept things that were the norm 20 years ago, but certainly aren't the norm now? Like, we have to all acknowledge in ourselves that, yes, we know better now, but at that time, I'm sure any of us would have done the same thing. It's just history. That's how things go, right? When you're brought on to bring something back that was from the 90s like this, I think it's important to go like, well, that's cool, we can bring this. That can stay back in the 90s. And so with Orchid, there was this real opportunity to kind of do that really overtly. The original theme from back in the 90s was like, the lyrics were touch me, feel me, right? Like it was just pure objectification. And so this time it's like, no, fuck it, man. It's like, touch me and I'll break your face. there was discussions about the level itself, and there was the idea that it was set in a war zone, right? And it was a Siberian war zone. And I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do like have a female vocalist, a female rapper maybe, and maybe a Siberian rapper? That would be kind of interesting, right? But it also needed to be electronic. Now, I'd never done anything like that before. I hadn't even really done the electronic thing that much. I certainly hadn't done any like sort of rap or stuff like that. And I had never worked with any Siberian rap artists before. So starting out on that, it was just not great. It was disaster after disaster after disaster. And it's fascinating, actually. It wasn't until I got Ali involved, who kind of bought the voice of Orchid, that things started to actually take shape and come together.
We never would have imagined that we would have gotten picked for the project. You were like, oh, hey, Mix just posted on Twitter that he needs a female vocalist. Like, you should post your demo reel. And I was like, okay, but I didn't think anything would come of it. We had never worked on video games before or anything like that. So he needed lyrics written because he knew whoever he hired, he wanted the vocalist as a woman to voice the character. He really wanted Orchid to feel like a strong woman was behind it, which was very exciting. And also just gave us a lot of trust and respect moving forward with him on the project.
The part about that story is I think I had about 7 weeks to do Orchid. Man, I screwed around for about 6 weeks with nothing. And everybody started getting really nervous. And I was like, it's going to work. Trust me, it'll work. And then I'd walk away going, I don't think it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to work. And then the moment we got Ali involved and they wrote some really great lyrics, I started putting it in, man, a game together in like 3 or 4 days.
It stands on its own, even outside of Killer Instinct. It does feel like a song that you could hear out in the world. When we heard it all together at once, I was like, oh my God, how did he make me sound so good?
Well, some people like hurl abuse in my direction, saying I'm quite pretentious sometimes. So what I'm about to say might just be fueling that fire, right? But just bear with me. There is like logic behind this. I consider that what we're doing with games is an art form, right? We're making art. And I feel any good art is a response to something, to responding to some sort of stimuli, right? And at that time, there was a tendency in video game music to sit in the background, and music had become this sort of thing that was just sort of background. And I remember composers at the time saying, no, the music is just the subtle subconscious thing that sits in the background. And I remember the quote, if people notice your music, you've done a bad job. You know, it's meant to just sit there in the background as some subconscious thing and not be noticed. And I remember that just pissing me off because I grew up with Killer Instinct, Donkey Kong Country, Red Alert, Duke Nukem, etc. And the music in those games was paired to me just as level of high importance as the game itself. That Duke Nukem theme, I feel Duke Nukem wouldn't be as successful at the time if it wasn't for that. Frank's stuff on Command & Conquer and Red Alert with Hell March, I think the Hell March suite is one of the like greatest pieces of music ever written for video games. And so that was the thing that lit this passion inside me for video game music. And at that time, when we were looking at Killer Instinct again for 2013, music had become this background thing. So I myself wanted to respond to that by bringing music up here again, making it obvious, making it something that people want to listen to, because there's this beautiful sort of zone that you get into as a player when you're listening to the music and you're grooving along with it and you're playing the game and everything fits, right? You get into this really interesting flow state. And so to me, it was obvious, like we just wanted this music to be something that you could listen to on its own outside of the game.
So in terms of Foley and other sound effects that are associated to the character, I wanted to get like, you know, the big beefy punches like you can hear in Mortal Kombat, the original Killer Instinct and other movies and stuff. I was lucky to be friends with someone who had access to the punch sounds from the original Indiana Jones. I know the story behind it. Basically, Banbert went into the woods and slapped a bag of leather with a baseball bat and got that, crack and the reverb in outdoor. I was like, I need to try to do the same experiment. And I went into the kitchen at Double Helix Games. I took all different kinds of props. I started hitting things. I might have broken a few things too. I had some baseball bat and I slapped, like leather chairs and things like that. And then I got all those recordings and then I put them into Pro Tools at the time and started, playing around with like plugins and stuff to get the right cracks and really push it to the extreme. That created the basis for how loud impacts would play in the game. Then after I worked around the more subtle sounds like, the character moving, if you saw any gear on the character, things that moved, like we're trying to support that as well. One of the cool things that we did for Saber Wolf was a bunch of old t-shirts that we ripped apart and it creates that big, cracks. We did that for like when he actually like transforms. I have an old funny video where Andrew and I smashed pumpkins together and the entire place was completely filled with pumpkins. It was gross. We used those big crunchy sounds for his footsteps. When we worked on Glacius, it was actually during summertime. I was like, okay, well, I need to get some ice. So I found on eBay this old ice cube tray that's super cool. You have a handle and you break it and you have the ice cubes. And I had some old jeans that I soaked in water and I put into the freezer. They were completely soaked and there was probably dripping stuff. And I remember at the end of the day, I got an email saying like, seriously, this is not sanitary. Like, why do you do that? But then after I showed him why I did that, I took the pants that were completely frozen and started to rip them apart. And you got all those creaks, that feel like icy in a way. And I recorded that for all the movements of Glacius. Thunder has a cool sound when he does his grapple. The sound that you hear when he grabs another character and he throws in on the other side is actually simply enough a spoon that you drag on a piece of cardboard. And it creates this zippy like... So I actually have a question for the community. I never revealed that sound, but I'm wondering if people can figure it out. When Fulgore opens its chest and there's the devastating beam that comes out of it, you have this tonal sound that goes like... I wonder if people can guess what it is. Spinal. That one was super fun. On his shield, he has like sort of like a tentacles and it's like very squishy and stuff and there's weird noise in there. When my wife ate some Mexican food, she didn't feel so good after. So she lied down on her bed and her stomach was just making all those weird like squishy sound. I was like, I have to record it. So I put some air gel on her belly while she was lying flat. And I put an hydrophone. Hydrophones are microphones that you actually put in the water to record like dolphins and whales and that kind of stuff. And I was actually able like to record everything like if you had your own ear inside her belly. And I recorded those weird, intestines basically, having bubbles traveling through it. And I put those sounds into a spinal shield. And every time I see it, it's like, hey, honey, look, it's yours. Mexican food. It's not really the sound that in a fighting game, you really pay attention to. But if it's not there, the character doesn't live. It's not credible. When they're there, they support all the movements. It feels pretty cool.
Yo.
Understanding the importance of audio in the series' history is one thing. But Jed and the team at Double Helix decided to take things one step further. What if players became the composers themselves and could affect the audio based on what they did or didn't do in a match?
Jed's a real visionary. He's always looking forward. He's always trying to look at new ways of doing things and like pushing boundaries and stuff like that. And one thing that he really pushed for was a dynamic music system. In the 90s, there was a very early dynamic music system where the music would change when the characters or one character got into a low health state. So Jed really wanted to kind of push that. What we arrived on was this. Music in our minds is storytelling. Two characters are coming together to battle. One's going to win, one's going to lose. That battle is going to have an action sequence. That's our story. Just the way as it would happen in a film or something like that, that's the story. The music needs to support the highs and lows that occur within that story. Because Killer Instinct, the music is very much like what would considered contemporary music or like pop music or metal or something like that, like stuff you'd listen to. We were able to take the structure of a pop song and hand the structure of that over to the player. So a typical pop song will have an intro, it'll have a verse, it'll have a chorus, it'll have an interlude, it'll have an ending, right? Those are sort of the structure points of a pop song. And all we did is break those sections out and handed the structure of that over to the players. So basically, when the players would achieve certain things in the match, the music would change.
One of my rules is to break the rule. And so I always try to break the concepts that I've heard in other games before, even in movies, and like, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? We were doing some pretty crazy stuff, like, you know, those meters that you have? We're like, hey, what if we use those meters from 0 to 100%? We change the volume of some layers.
So in the background of, say, Jago's theme, we've got Jago's theme grooving away. Now, if the player starts to build meter, they get an additional loop that sits on top of the music. And this loop pans from either the left speaker or the right speaker, depending on which side that character is. So if the character with the super meter is on the left-hand side, we get an additional loop on top of that music just in the left speaker. And if that player jumps over the other one, it just simply pans. It kind of follows them. And in the track, you'd get this.
Mick is so involved in the music process. He owns it completely. And so when we started to put his tracks and we had like, you know, some pretty clunky states that were just like, it wasn't working so well. So it was like, wait, can you send me like your Wise project? I'll grab them, I'll put my tracks into it and I'll make it fit so that you can just take them and put them in a game. So Mick is one of those rare game composers who actually can do the entire implementation themselves. This is where I think you get to the next level in terms of interactive music.
One of the most important things was trying to highlight the combo system. When the players are fighting and they start initiating combos, right, the game would check to see what number the combo got to. And if the game determined that you reached a pretty impressive combo, the game would trigger the chorus of a song. So in Orchid's theme, that would kick into this. And that would play, and that's it. After that would play, the game would run a second check to see if another player had initiated another high hit combo during that chorus. If one of the players had done another impressive combo in that time, the music system would then kick into the second cycle of the chorus. So instead of finishing and going back to the verse, it would kick into the next bit. Etc., etc. Now, same again during that phase. If another player initiated another high combo, we'd get the third iteration. Now, if at that point no player had done anything impressive, it would jump back to the regular verse music. And if there's a combo breaker, we'd have these combo breaker sections that would immediately stop the music from continuing the chorus. And so it would kind of interrupt the chorus, but still in a musical way, which was kind of cool. And when we put it into the game the first time around, oh man, it just felt so good, right? It was like rewarding you for getting the combo, but not really punishing you if you didn't quite get it. And it was always different too. It was like the players would start to link the music together themselves and they'd start to feel like it. It was almost like they were the conductor, you know, and they were kind of deciding when the music was going to play if they were good enough. And then the idea sort of came about, well, what happens if players just put the controller down? Like what happens then, right? Like what if they don't do anything? And it was like, oh man, maybe that's a really cool opportunity to kind of bring back these like classic Killer Instinct themes styled in the new way, but make it an Easter egg. I originally did it on Jago, and to be honest, I was actually really nervous about doing it because I thought it would get rejected. I thought they wanted nothing to do with the past and it just wanted to be a modern thing only. So Jago's throwback themes are really, really subtle. They throw back to the Killer Instinct 1 and Killer Instinct 2. That's how it starts, and then you get these really subtle hints of melody. And it's weird me listening back to that now. It's almost like I'm so not really confidently trying to do it, but just trying to make a little subtle suggestion to see if it gets rejected, right? Just out of fear more than anything. Turned out they really loved the idea. So a little while later, we just went full ham and did these whole like remixes of the classic tracks. But there was a couple of things. The one that I love that people get is the menu buttons. And so you hit pause, right? And when you pause, you get these drones. And these drones are inspired by the original Killer Instinct game when you'd die and you'd have that continue.
Game over. Continue.
And underneath that, there was always these really ominous drones. So I did a whole bunch like that. And then it was thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if when the player was picking the menu item, that the button sound, like the sound of the cursor moving between, played the Killer Instinct theme. So literally I have 18 different individual button sounds here that play in sequence. And when you play them, you hear the theme. And it's a testament to Robin Beanland's theme that the players could cycle through that in a completely different timing, right? Something that didn't represent the timing of the melody and still recognize the melody. That's a pretty cool thing.
It was a combination of John Baptiste and Mick and myself working very late on that because it's something that was not asked by anybody. Take the work of cinematics or trailers, people who do trailers, right? And sometimes what they do is they swap the rhythm with some sound effects, or they swap the sound effects with musical sound. And that just creates like, you know, like almost like music is sound effects is music, and it's a very cohesive experience. And for the Ultra, we wanted something to blow your mind, something really big. We already had like big sound effects, big vocals, music was loud pretty much all the time, was pretty bombastic all the time. Like, how can we break this rule? How can we break the system, make something even better? And that's where we're like, hey, what if we did like, you know, what they do in the trailers and remove the sound effects and just replace all the hits and things that are like, you associate more for things that happen in the real life with actually musical sounds.
I think just through out of naivety, we just said, yes, that's a great idea. we didn't sort of really fully understand the challenges that would come with that. What it meant was that each character, every time there was a punch, kick, headbutt, knee, whatever it was, would have a note. So that meant that the combo itself needed to have some sort of musicality to it. It needed to have a rhythm to it. So it needed to follow a tempo, right? A da 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 da. Needed to follow that, right? That was the first headache to get through.
And Mick basically sent a bunch of samples and we tried them. And the first pass was terrible because the animation was completely chaos. The problem was the team was trying to come up with an Ultra based on the original game, something that felt good, something that rises, but it was not musical at all. And we were working with tools as well that were, proprietary. It wasn't in Unreal, it was in Unity. The Ultra was a sequence of animations put back to back. And it was driven by an Excel sheet with a bunch of values there. And if you change those values, it would make the animation a little bit slower or faster. I was tweaking them and you could see like the animation was going faster, slower, but it was still like very hard to come up with like a rhythm from the animation without any basis for a musical theme. So that's where we started getting Mick involved in that process and asking him to send us a pattern for the musical Ultra. So we'd send like the original animation that John created. So I sent to Mick and then he sent me back a file with beep sounds. We put that right at the beginning of the Ultra. And so we would hear those beep happening and the animations and the hits were completely out of sync. And that's where after we changed those values in the Excel sheet, we got something that was feeling pretty cool. And then after we asked Mick to send us like a bunch of samples that would replace those beeps. And so we got basically the framework for the Ultra, which is a rhythmical pattern, and we could play sounds on it.
Each character needed an Ultra that was unique. So that's 8 Ultras. Each character could perform that Ultra on any stage. So Orchid's Ultra needs to sound like Orchid's Ultra on Orchid's level. Cool. It also needs to sound like that on Jago's level. It also needs to sound like that on Fulgor's level. It also needs to sound like that on Spinal's level. But it needs to be styled the way of the music of that level. So there's no disjointedness.
Mick was sending 400 sounds per level just for the Ultras. And so, that becomes like exponential. So I think like he came up with a process that, enables him to actually generate those sounds a little bit faster, but still in the end, it was a lot of samples.
The way we figured out how to do it was that each level would have several banks of notes, 5 banks of 10 notes. That's 50 notes per level. And then each character would have a sequence that would move through those banks. So the first bit would be note 1, note 3, note 7, note 5, right? Then it would move on to the next bank and say note 1, note 7, note 5, note 4. And it would continue through this until the Ultra was finished. So here are the 50 notes that belong to Orchid's stage. These are the first 10 notes of Orchid's stage. So the first one, right? So that's hit 1, hit 2, hit 3, 4. So that's all part of bank 1. Then it moves to bank 2, bank 3, etc., etc. And so this way was a way that we could kind of have a system that allowed for new characters to be added in the future with their own Ultras that would still work with the music that was on that level. It's really messy. It does work and get it done. Would I do it like that again? Hell no.
It was very difficult, and to be honest, I don't feel we nailed it. I think like we got to 60 60%, maybe 70% of what we wanted to achieve. You know, it happens in game development all the time. You have some ideas, you try to do it, it doesn't work that well, but we stuck with it. We're like, when you start something crazy, if you feel that it's going to work, keep digging into it.
These days, we've got a lot of better tools. If I was doing this today, we can do amazing things. But then again, I think it's like, this is the thing too. It's like looking at the system that we had and the tools that we had and going, well, this doesn't look possible, but let's try it, let's pursue and see what happens, Again, I think you end up somewhere interesting when you do that,
These are things that even if it wasn't a high energy score, these are practices that should be pushed forward in other games. And it is something that I've talked about and like pushed forward on games that I've been on, of just like using that, not necessarily as an aesthetic direction, but just like, here's from a technical nuts and bolts, here's a very streamlined and elegant way of handling a dynamic music score.
Killer Instinct was one of the first fighting games to embrace a seasonal model of content. It also was one of the first fighting games to have its development team bought out by another company between seasons. While we covered this transition from an overall point of view in our documentary Fight On, how did it affect the audio team specifically, and what changes were made moving into Season 2?
It was very turbulent. It was this brave new world, at least for Microsoft, of this idea of games as a service. And so whenever the news came about that Double Helix was acquired and we were moving over to Iron Galaxy, a large portion of us were pretty flabbergasted. There may have been people at the uber top that knew something like this was coming, but for me, I was just kind of like, oh crap, what does this mean? That transition, because there was a shift internally at Microsoft at the same time, if I remember right, and I remember them just like approaching me and just saying, listen, do you want to like run point on like the sound design for this game? Because your aesthetic is very similar to Jed's and the game, you love the game. Is this something that you'd want to do? And like before they finished it, I was like, yes. But at that point, there was like a transition where Boyd was moving into a different project and that kind of thing. What we did was Iron Galaxy was signed on, and we reached out to Chase Ashbaker out at Iron Galaxy, who was the audio lead out there. And I think we went out to Chicago first and met up with him, kind of went through the game, chatted with him about a bunch of stuff, and then all of us met Jed in Irvine and got like a 2-day deep dive of how all of the systems worked and just kind of had a full like download from Jed. Then we were able to kind of like, okay, how are we going to approach this? And the deadline for TJ Combo was just like tick 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 tick. It was ticking away very, very rapidly.
In the trailer, they wanted to sell this idea about TJ Combo's comeback story. Interestingly, though, I really needed a awesome vocalist. Really good vocalists are actually really hard to find. There's 96% of vocalists, and there's like 4% who are actually really, 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 really good. Reaching out to try and find a rapper, a lyricist, was really hard. And I sent out feelers to a bunch of people and I got all these like demos and things through, but nothing worked, right? Nothing worked at all. We needed something that really fit TJ Combo as a character in the stage of life that he was in. So he was like an older guy, he's like 40 plus, and he's had a difficult past, and he, left the boxing game in disgrace, and he worked on himself and he's come back, right? So this isn't like a young, arrogant 18-year-old. This is somebody who's mature and thoughtful and surgical and really thinks about things. And I was sitting down with my laptop watching Evo, and this opening song came on. It had this track that was like Amiga there, and he was like rapping away. And I was like, oh my God, that voice is just perfect, right?
Taskmaster, my blast to give you stress fractures. Web sling, kick slash, and I hit that X factor. About to go for that win, feel a lot of power over my skin. Got me mad and glowing up red with all these combos up in my head. And I can to the block.
Within 60 seconds, I had an email off to Jarrell. Like, instantly, straight away after him, trying to find out, hey man, could you do this thing? I'm doing Killer Instinct Season 2. We're working on TJ Combo. I really need you to be the rapper for this.
Once I passed the audition and Mick and I started working together, we basically had 2 weeks to come up with a song for TJ Combo. And it was great. It was mostly through Skype, and Dropbox and, Mick sending me different pieces and elements and me staying sharp as a writer, making sure that, I'm hitting emotionally and lyrically, staying in line with his vision.
What's great about his stuff was that his lyrics are just surgical, man. He's an absolute lyricist. And that, I feel, above all else, with a rapper is the most important thing. It's what you're saying, right? It's the words that are coming out of your mouth. How you're saying it, great, but it's what you're saying is the message, right?
Well, his comeback story, the fact that he had cybernetic implants in his body and he ripped them out because he wanted to be more of a pure boxer. And he's, fighting raptors and cyborgs and aliens from other planets, but even in the midst of that, he still had enough self-respect for his comeback that he didn't want any cybernetic advantages and still relied on his skills and his self-belief. And so I really wanted to capture that in the music, and I wanted to capture his confidence.
So we started with some that were like going to be more like a serious hip hop take, right? Something that was kind of heavy and groovy. And it was fun, like playing these really big beats. And I know Amiga was really into it and things at that time, but like throwing that into a gameplay, it just didn't fit. Like it just didn't feel like it fit the level. I would have loved to have done some tracks like that, but it didn't fit the game. And that's always the most important thing you got to come back to, is like whatever you're doing has to fit the game at the end of the day.
It speaks to the genius of Mick Gordon, how he could just like say, hey, I'm liking it, but I feel like we can go deeper. We can dive deeper. We can make something a little more magical. And so we actually, in our 2-week crunch time, halfway in the middle of that, Mick switches up, and what we know today as I'm Back to Rise, TJ Combo's theme song, we did in about a week.
King to all my opponents. I'm taking every moment to win, baby, I own it. Yeah, I stopped the zoning with flurries and combinations, saying you would hate me cause my skills are way greater. I'm back to, let the truth be told. I feel on fire when my passion flow. I'm back to, let the truth be told. I feel on fire when my passion flow. Let's rock. I'm back from.
There's two things to say about that, like, bringing stuff back from the 90s more confidently. Number one is that because it's season 2, we've already been through season 1 and we've seen how community reacts to things, right? And what we were finding was that whenever we was throwing back to the 90s stuff, it was resonating really well. And while I was unsure about that with Jago, it was clear by the end of season 1 that that's what people really enjoyed. And they really loved it. They're like, yeah, here we go, man. Here's this thing that I loved when I was a kid and it's come back now confidently. So then, with the great privilege of being able to step back in again for season 2, you're more confident making those decisions. So you can say, yes, definitely, I'm going to do this. I'm going to bring that theme back. The second point of that, though, is that acknowledging that what Robin and Graham did in back in the day was as good as it gets. Like Cinder's theme to me is just a modern version of the original, but just because the original sounds a bit dated because of the technology that they had. But I like to imagine myself with that, is that that's the theme that they would have done if they could have the technology that I had today. So it's just acknowledging that I couldn't do better. There was nothing I could add to it.
We were also in an incredibly aggressive release schedule for season 2, having like basically one a month, and every character had over 1,000 assets. So it was like, whenever you're starting one, you're just like, okay, here's what the moveset is. I know what I need to do with that. We're not sharing any content between different characters. Everything is bespoke. So anything like if it's just like the of a punch, that's completely crafted for every single character, and there are 10 variations to that little whew. And then you have 10 variations on the light version, 10 variations on the medium, 10 variations on the hard. I had Foley sessions basically scheduled at the kickoff of every single character. it's kind of Foley in isolation. Like, we're not really doing things to picture a lot of times. It's very kind of esoteric, sort of, okay, we want to do like a ton of whooshes because we know we need whooshes for everything. And we start like a list of things that we want to do. So like a big list that I had was, okay, we need all of these utensils and tools and different cabling and wiring to like take metal spatulas, route Ethernet cables around it, and then like swing it as a swirl, or like shorten the cable and swing it next to the mic really, really fast, or try to like get it to rotate as it kind of goes by the mic, just to get like these really kind of sounds that have a lot of personality to it. And then a big thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that we had a harmonization with all of the tones. So what we would do is we would record it with multiple microphones, but it was also routing through a harmonizer that was going into the mixer board. So you have like one track that is the clean version, and then there's another version that's an octave below, and then an octave below that. So you have like these options to do something that like you really want this beefy thing that maybe like it's just this, you know, knife on a string that you're swinging around and hoping you don't cut your head off. And it might just like sound like, whew, but then whenever you route it through all of this outboard gear, it just kind of goes. We recorded all kinds of things. We had this big fire recording session that we recorded like fireballs and like dropping bottles of fuel inside of open flame, and it was like blasting out and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Like taco shells glued together and then like slowly broken apart. That was Jeff Domkowski, who was a sound designer for season 2 and a portion of 3. He did a lot of Hisako, and all of her bone, like whenever she moves, that's a taco shell with with wood glue inside of it going. And we didn't want like those really explosive pops. We wanted something that would kind of like have sinew and muscle tissue that's kind of rotted inside of it. So like we had this kind of like strung together stuff. It's not necessarily like finding really weird stuff. It's like what is appropriate to this character and what will tell the story of this character, and then start amassing material from there. And then throughout all of that, we're also making all the trailers. We're recording the dialogue, which was every character, I think, was crammed into a 4-hour session each. Around Maya, we started figuring out kind of what we wanted to do. TJ Combo had bespoke music from Mick, but we didn't do that for every trailer. What we ended up doing was we would get the music deliverable from Mick, and then for a while, Boyd did it, and then I took over of doing the music edit. I would take all of the stems, and then I would construct sort of like this story using Mick's music, and then like a lot of transitional sound effects. We would do that as the first step, and then we would hand that track over to the editor. Sometimes it was Max, sometimes it was Media Lab out at Microsoft, and they would take a ton of gameplay footage, start splicing it together, and then give like an initial cut. But what I had them do is like, when you're capturing the game, do not capture audio. We would take the cut from there, and then we would go frame by frame and start slotting in like all the gameplay hits and any of like the special effects and all that stuff. That's all post-production. It usually happens, I mean, a lot of times it happened maybe 2 days before trailer release, but probably the two that were the hottest, one was Cinder, and that was like, it came in so hot that I basically stayed at work until like, I want to say it was like 1 a.m, and a fire alarm went off in the studio, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Of all characters. But then I think the one that was probably the fastest turnaround was Tusk in season 3, because that one, it landed so late that I had to do the full thing in one day.
Death comes to all, except me.
Season 3 of Killer Instinct would add 11 characters to the game, ranging from returning fighters like Kin Wu to guests like Rash from Battletoads. It would also lead itself to another critical transition, as after 2 seasons, Mick would be moving on to other projects.
As season 2 is wrapping up, Mick and I had a conversation, and I was just like, "Listen, do you want to come back? I know your schedule, like your dance card is getting very, very full." And he was just like, "I just can't." The release schedule for KI was very aggressive. Everyone knows it, and he had a lot of stuff on his plate that he had to focus on. So I was just kind of like, "I get it, dude. I totally understand. I'll miss the hell out of you, but I totally get it." On the offset, I was just like, crap, what am I going to do? I need to figure out how to make that happen. And I started thinking about it, and I knew that Arbiter was going to probably be a character. I thought of Tom Salta because he has a wealth of experience with the Halo franchise. And I was like, well, that would be a pretty good fit just to like be able to work in that world. And in an adaptable way, like being able to like shift it someplace else. And we were talking to a couple of other composers, and I gave Tom a shout, and I was just like, listen, is this something that you would be interested in? And like I gave him a whole bunch of reference from KI and sort of what the sound that we're looking for was. I was just like, it's not going to be a traditional score, dude. Like it's going to be like constructing songs and getting something that's hard hitting and adaptable. And it's deceptively complex, whenever you're talking about the construction of it. And he was like, well, I have a buddy named Clay that is like this monster in terms of like being able to do electronica, do cinematic stuff, do dance stuff, do dub stuff, do rock stuff. Would you be up for like doing a collaboration? I was like, shit, yeah, like that sounds great. Like I'm up for any kind of solution.
It was very fortunate because I already had known Mick Gordon, and Mick gave me a call, actually, and he said that he recommended me because he couldn't work on season 3. So we had to talk about it, and I listened to a lot of his work. I'm like, dude, you really established this. What the frig? And then I said, you know what? I know the perfect person to bring into this. So I called Clayton. I'm like, hey, man, you want to do this?
I'm generally pretty busy with my own project, so I don't have a lot of time. I almost feel like Tom was expecting me to be like, I'm sorry, man, I can't do it. And I'm like, this sounds awesome. He's like, let's do this. Like, Tom got me on board. We started chatting, and then Zach dumped a folder of, gigs of legacy music that Tom and I kind of sifted through. And that's really when I became familiar with the sound of Killer Instinct.
Yeah, we've done some collaborations together, but nothing of this scale. And it was really exciting because it gave me an opportunity to put back on the Batman mask as Atlas Plug. And truth be told, really when I started as Atlas Plug, Clayton was a huge inspiration for me. Back in 2002, when I first heard Celldweller, I'm like, what the frig is this? So having the chance to be an artist again, to approach this as an artist and to team up with another artist who was such an inspiration to me from the beginning. It was great chemistry. We really had a great workflow, and I think that's what this score kind of needed and deserved.
They like went away, and then they came back with the test, and they did the Kim Woo track, and it's pretty close to what's in season 3. And I basically hit play on it, and it went for about 10 seconds, and I was like, yeah, they're hired.
Yeah, so the Kim Woo demo was really, it was proof of concept. So we're like, let's do a 2-minute track, which is, I believe, what it was. It was 2 minutes, basically. We ended up combining all of the elements that we could see fleshing out into a longer form thing. We tried to cram as much as we could in that 2 minutes, keep it super high energy, referring to the original Kim Woo theme, the ethnic instrumentation.
I always have loved, just as a composer, bringing in all kinds of other influences from whether it's ethnic or otherwise, and fusing those things together. For me, that was a very natural way to approach it. And then when Clay came in, he just killed it, with the guitars and the drums and the way he does his magic. And then I don't recall if we brought in the vocalist Tuna Kim, the Korean female vocalist on that, but she was perfect for it. It really was a wonderful collaboration. Wherever we're approaching an idea, it's like, okay, now it's time to killer instinctize it. And I think really the way I would describe it, Clay might have a different way of describing it, was certainly it's just turning the adrenaline to 11. Very hard rock-inspired or very hard industrial rock-inspired drums, a certain kind of really industrial and process guitar sound. Everything's super, super tight, in your face, very aggressive and punchy.
I would say that the sum of our parts was definitely greater than us individually. Like, Tom is really great at stuff that I suck at. And I can do things just because I have different upbringing that Tom is like, hey, take this, you know? So character by character, we'd review the material, kind of what is the direction. I remember Mira, because she was kind of very orchestrally oriented, and Tom lit up like a child, and I'm like, I wouldn't even try to do this first because he'd probably just punch me out if I even tried. So I'm like, take that. And when I got the first iteration of what he was doing, I was like, my mind was like, oh my God, this is going to be insane. And then there were times where it was like, this is going to be rock based or whatever. So I'd pick up a guitar, you know, some drums, whatever, dial in something. And then it's from there on in, really, it's basically tossed back and forth and back and forth. And we just kind of embellish. There'd be times I'd be working on one section and Tom would be working on something completely different. And then we'd come together, boom. And now we've got, 45, 50 seconds of a song written versus us single-handedly maybe only taking 20 seconds of a track because he wrote a whole part, I wrote a whole part. And very rarely did we write stuff we were like, oh man, that's terrible. If we did, it was us saying it about our own parts. I'd write something and be like, I don't know why I sent that to you, I'm sorry, And sometimes he would disagree and be like, no, this is cool. So it was completely collaborative. I don't really collaborate very often. And it's like when I do, this is the way I like it to be. Like, this was a great experience.
Any of the like established sort of characters, the new characters like Arbiter or General Rem, the good thing is like the game audio world is super small, and particularly at Microsoft. So like I knew the audio directors on the Halo franchise. I knew the audio directors at the Coalition. And it's like, listen, we're going to be doing this. What do you want me to actually showcase from the character? And what can I go crazy with? And we basically get this kind of like breakdown of like, all right, Arbiter has the energy sword, so I'm going to really zone in on that and make sure that feels right. And they gave me some source content that I can kind of take and then like ground it through the KI filter, which is just kind of like, just like a massive hammer. And then just kind of like what I would do is just kind of shoot it back over to them and be like, are you cool with that? And they'd be like, yeah, great. And it's like, okay, I'm going to just like go off and go crazy then. And they're like, yeah, go to town. What I generally wanted to do is just basically get buy-in from the IP holders just to make sure that I wasn't going off the rails too much and making sure that they felt comfortable that their characters were being represented, but also within the KI world.
I had just come off of finished working on Halo 2 Anniversary. I'd done my original score for Spartan Assault. I understood the Halo DNA incredibly well. And as soon as they said, well, we're bringing a Halo character, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, I know I just finished doing that music, recreating it. I know all of those themes. I know the Halo sound and the elements that are going to make it Halo. But then it was a little intimidating because it's like, okay, how are we going to killer instinctize this? I'll lead into Clay, but man, when he he went as far as singing, recording his voice and lowering the pitch and doing some crazy stuff in there. But take it away, Clay.
Now is the beautiful thing too, is having Tom's experience. We just deferred to Tom and his knowledge of the project. And it's like, can I get away with this? Should I do this? So cutting vocals, making up like a chant of some sort. And, I think we were both keeping our fingers crossed that when the game is released, we weren't going to be crucified for killing, the Halo franchise versus actually adding to it. And I think we got a really great response.
With Rash, it was this kind of thing that was just like, well, I do want to approach this in a KI method. I want to make sure it feels new, but I want to honor, the throwback nature and the legacy for Battletoads. So Jeff Domkowski, the same guy that did Hisako and all the taco shells, I was just kind of like, why don't you focus on all of the like new contemporary stuff? I'll do all of like the chiptune-y kind of throwbacky kind of stuff, and we'll layer them together and see what it sounds like. So like I went through a lot of the original Battletoads assets, like just basically like went through YouTube and then just kind of listened to it and was like, okay, I can construct those same waveforms pretty easily. So I would just kind of do that and then just kind of like start routing them through some of the KI processing chain to make sure it like still glued together, but it still had basically a retro feel to it. And then Jeff and I kind of sat together and was like, okay, let's kind of like look at this wealth of material and see how we can kind of bridge that gap.
For Rash, I think the challenge that I felt is that, okay, we have to make it retro, but it can't be cheesy. Because we wanted to go for this ultra Eddie Van Halen guitar sound on that and performance with soloing and stuff. I have a guitarist friend who's a guitar hero, literally, Steve Wimette, and he was able to bring in the exact tone and guitar type and soloing that you would hear from the likes of Eddie Van Halen. So we can really get that Van Halen sound. So really, the approach that we took with Rash and a lot of the guidance that Zach gave us is think about this character wearing like a Sony Walkman. Like, what would he be listening to in the 80s as he kicked someone's ass?
For Rash, I was already midstream on my artist album where I was combining 8-bit sounds with guitars. And it was like, hey, Tom, I can do this. Let's try to actually refer to the original Battletoads by using some actual 8-bit sounds, but clearly they're modernized. And then they go from that into huge guitars and drums, and then guitar solos and all this other stuff. I mean, high energy. And we had so many sections to play with where we went fully just 8-bit, and then we went fully guitar, and things where we blatantly referred to the original game. We just had fun.
One thing that I would like to talk about was Eagle and like the collaboration with the Nez Perce tribe. When we knew that Eagle was going to be part of the cast, we really wanted to make sure that it was represented properly, as much as you can in a ridiculous fighting game with frogs and robots. We originally did like try with an actor to do it, and we're just like, it doesn't feel right. So like we approached them and we're just like, would you like to be Eagle? Like, would you like to have a representative be Eagle? And it was pretty tremendous. It was really amazing. Like they came in and they had multiple family members and tribe members came in and just kind of sat with us while we were kind of going through it all. It was one of those experiences that was just, I'll take with me, forever. It's kind of part of that accessibility sort of thing of just like, we want to represent as many types of people, what people love, everything we want to represent as much as we possibly can. I'll take a little bit of credit for it, but a lot of it comes from Jed. You know, like he really established what the tone was at the beginning and wanted to make sure that like the characters had their own personality. And then when I came on board, I was just like, one of the main goals that I want to have happen is if your kids playing on your TV, I want your mom in the other room to be able to tell which two characters are fighting. And then that bled into the conversation of final mix of season 1, of being able to know, you know, when you're being attacked, when you're attacking, when you're defending, when they're defending. We wanted to make sure that we were kind of honoring the arcade sort of legacy as well, because like our old arcade games, you don't have the freedom of having a ton of variation. You know, in the 90s, you had maybe like 1 or 2 variations of a sound. So those sounds had to be very punchy and they had to have a lot of like signature to them. So you knew exactly what that sound meant. And we wanted to carry that through, but in a more contemporary way. And then as we were kind of moving along through the seasons, we kept that idea going. And then I noticed, you know, feedback from a gamer by the name of Sightless Combat that had some additional sort of feedback about what, since he's a low vision gamer, like he couldn't tell certain things that were going on. And that was whenever I kind of took that philosophy, the arcade philosophy, and I'm like, oh, okay, actually, this is a necessity now. We're going to take this methodology and now start pushing it forward to make sure that it's something that, while yes, it's going after, you know, a group of people, it's ultimately going to make the game better and more defined and easier to understand for everyone.
Killer Instinct's audio, combined with its characters and unique combat mechanics, have helped it stand apart from its contemporaries in the genre. Its development was intense, with short deadlines and an even tighter budget, but the implementation of its music and audio are a clear cut above its competition, and the effects of its design can not only be found in fighting games, but throughout gaming as a whole.
It was incredible from a musical standpoint because each month we had a new character that needed a theme that I knew everybody would pay attention to, and each theme needed to be completely different and unique. It also needed to fit with the game. When you're writing music on a game, often you're writing, say, 3, 4, 5 hours of music and maybe one song people will pay attention to. The rest of the stuff is just sort of not ignored, but it just becomes part of the score. Whereas I knew with this, every time there was a new character coming out, there was going to be something unique. So I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about giving music a special character. And I feel I've learned that lesson. I still take that lesson now. Whenever I sit down to, you know, write music for a new project or something, it's all like, how do I give this piece of music a character like we did on Killer Instinct? And it's amazing to see that it's had such of a longevity as well. And that's purely the community. The moment I hit render on this and I save it and I send it off and it gets into the game, that's me done. I have nothing to do with it anymore. That's it. It is done. If it has a life after that, that's not me. That's the community doing it, right? That's the community giving it that life. So witnessing the Killer Instinct community has been quite incredible as well.
The fans are very, very passionate.
Yes.
To this day, there are still KI loyalists and fans who follow what we do, and they're just fantastic people. But It was also a lot of pressure because they're all very, very passionate.
I've never gotten work off the back of Killer Instinct directly because I didn't write on that. I would never claim it as my creation. But just the validity that it's brought, for instance, the beginning of Devil May Cry, when I was pitching for that, they kept referencing Killer Instinct. It's like the penultimate song-based video game. I remember them bringing it up, and then my agent being like, well, you helped on this, right? And I'm like, yeah, but we can't use that as like the selling point. But for her, it worked great because it was like, we want a vocalist like this. And I'm like, well, guess what? I have the exact same vocalist. That level of validity that it's brought into our careers time and time again, just to help us get kickstarted. I mean, yeah, it's played a pretty huge part.
We're always kind of building off of what we've learned and just kind of expanding it into this huge base of knowledge that we can pull from when we need to. And yeah, it's just crazy to look back on it and see how everything has evolved over time.
You know, I think we really approached all of these characters essentially going, what do we think is cool? If we were playing this game, we were doing, what would we want to hear? We got to experiment, do weird things, play with sounds and styles across the board, work with all types of different other artists and other musicians, and somehow bring all of that together into a cohesive Killer Instinct sound.
I love KI, and I think, to date, it's probably the game that I have the most fun with still. It is one of those games of just like, anytime I listen to the music, of all 3 seasons, the extension, all of it, it's something I'm very proud of, and I'm proud of the team to really kind of like step in and kind of knock it out of the park, because it was very aggressive, and it was stressful, but at the same time, like, you're talking about mixed passion. Everyone on the audio team had that same passion. Like, we were all incredibly passionate about this project. We love this game, and we would nerd out about it all the time. We would like stay after work and be like, okay, let's think about other things that we can record. Let's figure out like how to make this little bit a little bit more impactful. Let's figure out how to like squeeze every drop of juice out of this thing. Let's put all of us in it as well. There was a lot of hands in this project and a lot of love with it as well, and I think that shows.
Thanks for watching Killer Sounds. I have so much extra interview footage that we're actually going to have a second video called Composing Instinct releasing on June 21st, where Mick Gordon will walk us through the making of several tracks from KI Seasons 1 and 2, while also hearing from folks like Ali and Casey Edwards, Little V Mills, Thrash Heavy, and more about what it was like to be a part of the project. So be sure to subscribe to know the second that goes live. And if you wish to support our work directly, you can do so at patreon.com/holdbacktheblock. Until next time.